Harold Sigvan Kaveolook was a successful educator because he began a grassroots movement in the village of Kaktovik that valued education. Student success is clearly linked to teacher retention, and the best way to ensure lasting retention is by growing local teachers who are raised in the culture and language of the Inupiaq people. For thousands of years, the Inupiaq of the North Slope of Alaska have been educating their children in their traditional ways. From a very early age, children were instructed in the culture of their people. Their first educational experiences were through observation, and as they grew, their level of involvement grew as well. As a traditionally matrilineal society, the formal education of the boys fell to their mother's brother. Boys were taught to hunt, trap, and create the implements needed to accomplish both. They helped build ice houses, windbreaks, men's community houses known as kargi, and ice cellars. Knowledge of the land and how to navigate was central to a young boy's education. Reading the clouds and weather was also imperative for survival. Constructing and caring for a sled and dog team would have fallen to the boys as well. Furthermore, young boys were taught carving skills. Girls were taught to process the animals that the men caught, from skinning to stretching and scraping to softening and working them. They were also taught to sew the skins and prepare the sinew for thread. As grown women, they would be responsible for keeping all of the members of the household clothed and warm in the harsh environments that the Arctic threw at them. If young girls made mistakes in their sewing, they were forced to take out their stitches and do it again, as many times as it took until it was done correctly. Clothing and boat membranes had to be waterproof and wind-resistant. Child rearing and plant gathering were also important responsibilities tasked to the women. Both boys and girls were taught the oral traditions of their people. They would grow up listening to stories and accounts that would be passed down to their children. Storytelling is still an important part of the traditional education of Inupiaq children. Furthermore, they would learn the songs and dances of their people. Things began to change for the Inupiaq after the acquisition of Alaska from Russia on March 30th, 1867. Prior to 1923, when Thomas Gordon moved his trading post to Barter Island from Demarcation Point, Kaktovik was a seasonal camping site. People began to congregate around the trading post, but year-round residency was sporadic until the late 1940s and early 1950s, when the construction of a dew-line radar station installation, which began in 1954, was established, bringing good-paying jobs to local inhabitants. In addition, in its desire to become a state, the government of Alaska began pouring money into education and created compulsory education laws for all children of the territory. At this time, there were 8 families living permanently on Barter Island, where present-day Kaktovik stands. Construction began on the runway in 1948. Concerned about the children of these families, the Air Force contacted the Civil Service Center at Ladd Field in Fairbanks, who hired Donald Berg. He taught in a vacant house from late October until February, when he was called up for active service. Instruction was halted for the remainder of the year until the Bureau of Indian Affairs recruited Frank Gregory. He and his wife taught from October 1950 to February 1951, when they returned to Fairbanks. Instruction again was halted. It was at this time that Harold Kaveolook began his lifelong work of educating the children of Kaktovik. With only 1 year of experience, Harold took on the daunting task of, quote, helping my people and the children. So who was this Harold Kaveolook? Harold Sigvan Kaveolook was born on August 24, 1917, at Tagara, or Point Barrow, Alaska. His father was Paul Kaveolook, and his mother was Nellie Levitt. Harold began his formal education when he was 11. At the age of 22, the 1940 census listed his highest grade completed as 8th grade. When he was 23, Harold was a student at the Eklutna Vocational School, an opportunity that would last for 3 years until he was drafted into the service during World War II. A World War II hospital admission certificate shows that he was a private in the infantry. He served for 7 to 8 months in Alaska, helping to build the road to Valdez. On February 21st, 1956, he married May S. Agiak at the First Presbyterian Church in Fairbanks, Alaska. He was 38, she was 22. Together, they had 8 children: Carol, Nora Jane, Marie, Lottie, Paul, Harold Jr., Kathleen, and Roy. It was from his desire to help his people and children that led him to take on the monumental task of educating the children of Kaktovik. The first year, Harold had an enrollment of 8 school-aged children and 4 older students. They met in the largest building in the village, which measured 14 feet by 18 feet. After repairing the floor, constructing benches with tops for writing desks, installing an oil stove, and adding shelving for books, Harold opened the doors. His supplies consisted of paper, pencils, erasers, crayons, and textbooks. Students received 180 days of instruction. Harold stated that there was a high degree of parents in support of the school, and the children were eager to be in school. In a paper that he would present to the first Inuit Circumpolar Conference in 1977, Harold wrote, quote, "You never saw such a wholesome group of children during those early years, and no finer parents to support you." By 1953, drawn by the promise of good-paying jobs and a school for their children, 5 families moved back to Kaktovik from Herschel Island in Canada. These families included the Gordons, Lins, Agiaks, Allens, Olagaks, and Suplus. This increased the student population from 20 to 30, with the peak population occurring in 1963 with 46 students. From 1951 until 1964, Harold would teach beginners through 8th grade in this building. In 1964, the BIA built a regular 2-classroom school. Harold loved teaching in a small rural school. He extolled the benefits by writing, quote, "There are no discipline problems because you are close to your pupils at all times, and they understand you well and know you are their friend and know they will receive help from you." He also stressed that teachers must focus on the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. He also believed that in larger schools, where students have a broad variety of options and move from classroom to classroom, students are distracted from the real focus of instruction. He also felt that there is not as much room for the teacher to supplement or reinforce the learning process of the children through writing, creative writing, writing their own stories, as you would have in a small school. By 1958, the school was starting to feel the constraints of space, so the 7th graders were sent to Chilocco, Oklahoma, and to Chemawa, Oregon. Many of Harold's students would go on to attend secondary, trade, or post-secondary schools. One entered the welding trade and moved to Washington, where he built ships. Others were sent to Chemawa, Sitka, Mount Edgecombe, or Wrangell to complete high school. Their professions included minister and teacher. Many returned to the village to start families and hold local jobs that supported the community and culture. Harold delivered his daily instructions in the Inupiaq language, but also insisted that the students speak English. His students wrote constantly in their attempt to master the English language so they could understand what the texts were saying. Basic mathematical foundations were also laid, with a focus on addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and fractions. Mr. Kaveolook also taught young children to read using a combination of phonics and sight recognition. For his amazing achievement and unconventional teaching style, Mr. Kaveolook was awarded a Superior Performance Award in 1962. In 1964, the new two-room school was complete. It included teacher quarters and cold and warm storage warehouses. During this academic year, John and Barbara Ricketts took over the school operations, and Harold took a new post to start adult education classes. This lasted for 1 year. In 1965, Charles and Doris Moody and their 2 children came to take over operations from the Ricketts. Charles was to be a principal teacher, and Harold once again went back to the classroom to teach the youngsters, while continuing to run the adult education classes. His main focus for the adults was to help them read so they could make orders from Sears, Ward, and Alden's. Advanced groups learned how to prepare their taxes. Kaveolook and Moody worked harmoniously for 3 years until 1967, when Harold again took over as principal teacher. He held this position until 1970, when he moved his family to Barrow and accepted the principal position over the primary school. After being involved with the education system for over 30 years, Harold gained a unique perspective. He would later write about his observations and the superior quality of education available to rural students. Quote, "I feel that the small rural schools are the healthiest in setting compared to a large school such as Barrow for raising and teaching the children. There is more interest in study and more receptiveness and responsiveness to the teachers, more respect for the teacher, and a more wholesome atmosphere in small village schools." On May 7, 1987, he received an honorary doctorate degree during a ceremony at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. Harold would go on to live out his years in Barrow, Alaska, and passed away on October 4, 2000. While his time on Earth was limited, as all of ours is, he has left a legacy. The people of Kaktovik value education and the potential that it brings for their children. The school in Kaktovik is named after Dr. Kaveolook, and it is a proud beacon of his dedication to ensuring that the children of Kaktovik would be successful in a changing world dominated by Western ideals. He gave Kaktovik the greatest gift he could think of, a future, and it is up to the new generations to carry that gift for the children yet to come.